Welcome back to A Fresh Story, the podcast where we have conversations about brave decisions to start over again. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Jenny, and we're so glad you're here today.
Hello, sister.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm hungry, and it doesn't help that I'm looking at this Instagram from our last guest called No One Asked Eats, where he posts a lot of delicious looking barbecue. And I really don't know what we're going to have to go scrounge for lunch because nothing is going to look
nothing. As Sinead O'Connor says, nothing compares to you.
Yeah, exactly.
To barbecue meat.
To barbecue. But I do think if we ask nicely, Rob, or not that nicely, Rob will let us come up and he'll cook for us. So our guest today was actually such a funny thing that happened. Not really that funny. I don't know. Rob and I went to high school together. Our classes weren't that big. I don't think we've ever had a conversation, but he has had such an interesting life, and I've been watching, and mostly because his wife is gorgeous and fascinating, and that hooked me in. And we talk about that on the podcast. But a couple of months ago, he posted like that he was around between jobs, and did anybody want to sort of talk about what they were working on? And I am just a weird person. So I said, sure, why not? And we got on a Skype call or a Zoom call. I was in Scotland. He was in upstate New York. And we had the first conversation we'd ever had, even though we've known each other since we were 14.
Like those connections.
And it was like, I'm so glad because he's a light. Like, I know we call people lights a lot, but he's part of our world now, and he's just such a wonderful, happy, positive person with so many real, interesting, important findings of the world. He's had a very interesting life. We talk a lot about the universality versus the specificness of people's lives, and how we have so much we can connect over, and also the details are different. And I just loved this conversation. We hope to have him back really soon to talk about food. I was
really blown away with his perspective on race and raising daughters and growing up between two worlds. And kind of like finding his way and also he's in marketing, which we love to talk about. So it was a beautiful, awesome, wonderful, vulnerable, funny conversation. We are definitely going to have him back on. So please enjoy the episode with Rob, and please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to A Fresh Story so that we can keep telling your fresh start stories. Rob is a marketing executive with over 15 years of experience helping small businesses, startups, and large household brands market their products and services to the masses. Most recently, as the head of marketing and partnerships for a tech startup called ShearShare, where he helped triple their active user as well as their annual revenue. In addition to navigating a successful marketing career, Rob has spent the same number of years building award-winning teams across a number of industries, from banking and financial services to franchise restaurants. Rob enjoys coaching talent and helping individuals develop goals to achieve their own personal successes in business and life, which we're all about here at Fresh Starts. So we're super excited to talk to you today, Rob.
Likewise. Thanks for reading that. I feel so accomplished.
You are.
Rob and I actually go way back. We went to high school together, which I've known him since I was 14 years old, which is pretty crazy. It's been 21 years.
To think about.
Yeah. We are so excited to have you here today. Rob is one of my favorite people to watch on social media. He has an awesome cooking Instagram called No One Asked Eats, and we love that. Rob, would you take us back to the beginning of your fresh start story?
My fresh start, I think you know what, and it's funny because you talk about friends. That was my first fresh start, right? And that's if I can go back to my 14-year-old self or 13-year-old self, the idea of leaving for a few hours a day, but leaving everything and going into an entirely new and scary environment. Like, it's one thing to graduate or to move on from 6th grade and go into 7th grade in the middle school. It's a whole other thing to leave one side of Long Island and then go to the complete opposite side of Long Island that you've never been to before. And
And
for
sorry,
me,
you came into Friends in 7th grade?
I came in 8th grade.
8th grade.
Yeah, I'm a
Okay.
year younger than everyone. That's no one knew that. I was always a year younger than everyone.
Oh, but I came in 9th grade. So you seemed
Okay.
established by the time I got
Oh
there.
no, that was all smoke and mirrors.
So
Yeah,
what
no,
was that like? I mean, what was that like? So where did you grow up as, childhood?
so yeah, I grew up in Hempstead, New York. And born and raised there. My mom still lives there. And so for like with exception to I played sports, right? So I was
Mm.
on traveling basketball teams and we would go to different states and different cities. Um, but the idea of leaving Hempstead and then going to Locust Valley, which
Yeah.
like for anyone who doesn't know, it is literally night and day.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
a weird experience because you don't fully know what you're getting yourself into.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that age, right, like you don't know anything. So for me, like I was coached on it because I the connection was my basketball coach had gotten other folks from
Mm.
our team into Friends.
Okay.
uh, and realistically, uh, like I had never seen, like I come from lower income, right? So I know what I know, and that's it. Like
Mm-hmm.
you see things on television about how the other side lives, and then to go to Friends and see it in real time.
Yeah.
I think I had the year before I did a like a tour, and I was there for 3 or 4 hours. But you're only seeing school stuff, and you're
Yeah.
engaging to a certain extent. But then to go and be there every day for 8 hours and then sports after, and then
Yeah.
go to my first sleepover, and like my house is its size, and then go to someone else's house that my house
Yeah.
could fit into 3 times.
Yeah.
Um, that was my first eye-opening experience, and then staying with it for 5 more years and just seeing and being immersed into different things. Now it's a double-edged sword. I got a lot out of it, even
Yeah.
now as a 35-year-old. But it's so intimidating, right? At that age, especially when you're trying to
Yeah.
figure out who you are, and then being black and going to a mostly white school, and now I got to figure out where I fit in within myself, and then within that community. Then I got to go back home and fit into that community. It was just, it's a
Yeah.
lot.
A lot of
Yeah.
code switching, a lot of code
Oh, for
switching.
sure.
I would love to hear what your perspective was like going there as a black student from Hempstead, which Hempstead, I mean, and I was, when you're talking about going from Hempstead to Locust Valley, literally the road changes, right? You go from bumpy roads to slick,
Yeah.
You
the
cross 2
tax,
train tracks.
right? You do. So what was that like? Like, I have chills thinking about it for you. Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah. As
You
a
know
6th grader,
what?
as a 7th grader too, or 8th grader, like you're
Well,
so little.
yeah, I think up front, totally oblivious, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Because again, you don't know what you don't know. So
Mm-hmm.
like I never had to experience judgment. So I didn't even know what it was or what it felt like, right?
Yeah.
And then I think it clicked for me probably 9th or 10th grade, probably end of
Mm.
9th, early 10th grade. And that's when I realized not just how different I was, but I realized just like what I had gotten myself into, because that's when like the expenses start to come, because now you're not just
Mm.
going to sleep over someone's house. Now you're going to dinners and
Mm-hmm.
lunches and things like that, right? And then
That's
we were sneaking
interesting.
out in like junior year and going to
Right.
lunch early, right? And so
I had no idea that
and
people were
and the
doing that.
crazy, oh
Because you're
yeah,
a nerd.
we were
I
doing
was a
all kinds
nerd.
of, you don't even
I
want
was
to
a
know.
nerd. Rob was cool. Like, don't let him fool.
But
Rob was very much, he was so nice, but he was definitely cool. And I was like a nerd. And that I'm fine
well,
with
you
that.
know what? Realistically, and I wouldn't necessarily say that got me into marketing, but that's when I realized that not necessarily that I was smarter than everyone, that I knew how to be a chameleon,
Package
right?
yourself.
So
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't necessarily like, I could be an asshole, right? But I wasn't one
Mm-mm.
in face value, right? I could talk to everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and I think like looking back on it, it was a coping mechanism, because I didn't know where I fit, so I had to fit in everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because when I went home, I didn't fit in at all. Because you talk about code switching, my voice changed, my
Mm-hmm.
vernacular changed, because I was somewhere else for 9 hours a day,
Yeah.
right? And so it was hard to switch back to a different vocal
Yeah.
structure and all that.
Wow.
So I had to become someone who could talk to anyone, right?
Yeah.
And knew that I could move from any circle to another. And I don't know how I did it without that much judgment, right? Because typically it's like, oh, he's trying to fit in there, or he's trying to fit in there. I never had that confrontation.
I think you're just a very kind, nice, positive seeming person. I'm not going to say you are positive. I'm not going to put that on you, but you're positive seeming. And that's how I remember you. Like, we didn't have much contact in high school, but you were a person that like didn't intimidate me. You were just, you always seemed incredibly nice. And I think that has a big part of it.
Well, you know, when I was having this conversation with my wife about the intimidation, because I'm 6'4", right? I'm
Yeah.
200.
And he's been tall since like 14.
And
So
so I don't, now I think about it a lot more, about where I stand compared to someone else and the effects I may have on them. And I wrote about it a couple of years ago. And it was like during like the George Floyd big movements and stuff. But the idea of me walking with my two daughters, and I skip a lot, we sing, we dance, they whistle, right? And if you see me walking down the street by myself, it's one thing. If you see me with them, it's a completely different thing, because I'm a completely different person. If I'm by myself, like I'm in my own world, I'm probably talking to myself, because that's what I do. But to be with my two daughters and skipping and singing, right? It's a mind fuck, right?
It's interesting.
It's like, that's a big dude having a good time.
It's a lot of good time happening on 6'4".
For sure, right? But the idea of friends, and I think someone started like an Instagram account about their time being minority and friends, and reading it like a couple years ago as a 30-year-old with kids. That's when it clicked that like my time that I remember wasn't necessarily the time that I had. Right? I was in my own world, like literally creating my own world so that I was comfortable. And then you realize there were things that happened that totally went over my head, that probably were a much bigger deal than I made them out to be. And that's when you have to wonder if I did myself a disservice, or if I was really just so immersed in this fantastic fantasy world, where I actually fit in. But realistically, I may not have, right? There was a lot of things that like, okay, I was captain of sports for sophomore junior and senior year for both football and basketball. Like, I could do no wrong at that school, right? And I, like, Jen, I did a lot of wrong stuff in that school.
What did you do wrong?
Well, that's like, right? We were partying hard, right?
Yeah, I heard rumors.
Yeah, we were partying very hard, and like the things that we were partying with, I couldn't afford, but somehow made it happen, right?
Right.
And so, looking back on that, and just how it changed my college years compared to like being the sports guy and then not playing sports at all, being so immersed in my quote unquote extracurricular activities in college.
Where did you go to college? I don't remember.
I went to Seton Hall, but I graduated from Pace. I transferred to Pace. But it's a weird thing. Again, you talk about the double-edged sword. I had internships. I had great mentors, right? Who, as you said, were either owning multi-billion-dollar companies or high executives within them. Opened up a lot of doors for me. But my extracurricular activities were like just demolishing me, right? And having kids kind of changed that, but it took a while into having kids to change that.
Well, you started young, like not young, but like you met your wife pretty early, right?
Yeah, I met her 2008. I was a junior.
You were a kid, And Rob's wife, I don't know if I've ever told you this. Your wife, I think I may have reached out once and been like, she's the most beautiful woman. Like, she is. I mean, so I know you think that. The way Rob talks about his wife on social media is so sweet and real, but she's gorgeous, and I can understand why, as like a junior in college, you'd be like, I'll follow you. Like, that makes sense.
Well, like, because that's the thing, right? My wife is older than me and much more successful than me, right? And I'm not just saying that. And she, like, we get into these massive debates on success and what that actually means. But like, when I met her, she had just moved from Canada and had been in a business for a long time. She owned a restaurant. She did this. She just worked for the Clintons. She's done everything, right? And people are like, "Oh, you worked at MTV. You're really cool." I'm like, "Yeah, but she's like even cooler." but yeah, I think like I was a kid when I met her and
Mhm.
doing kid stuff, and she
Mhm.
was much more established, and that's a when you talk about restarts, and me and her had this conversation like a decade later, because I was everyone she introduced me to was like some big deal because she was just older, so she had a more established set of friends, right? And I would always say like I always felt so out of place because like I was still in college and like we were talking to like the billionaire who makes jewelry, and I had just
Mhm.
graduated. What am I offering to this
Yeah, yeah.
conversation, right? And so like that played a part in our relation in our up and down relationship early on, but we weren't, or at least I wasn't in a space to be able to say it out loud, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's embarrassment or just not wanting to deal with it. And now as we're older and we talk a lot more and I'm much more open, it's an interesting dynamic to look back at that stuff and think about a fight we had. And we were literally having two different fights because
Mm.
I wasn't being honest about what we were actually fighting about, right? And so it's a weird, like, relationships are weird, whether they're friendships or marriage or
Yeah.
girlfriend. It's all a weird thing, especially for me because my parents, like, I don't remember a time when they were together. I
Mm.
was like 5 or 6 when my dad left, right? And
Right.
so I don't have a my relationship with marriage is through other people,
Right.
right? And seeing how their parents are and what they did. I didn't have that, right? It was just my mom. And I didn't me and my dad didn't get on speaking terms until like when my kids were born, I think. So like you talk about a 20-year difference between that. I'm making it up as I go for the most part.
I have a question.
That also
Sorry.
seems incredibly therapized too. Like, and you don't have to say if you've been in therapy or not, but like I think the thing about a long-term relationship, like you and Jennifer have been together, what now? It's like, you
It'll
gotta
be
be,
15 years of knowing each other next month.
yeah, that's a
Married
long
married for
time.
12. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And you have, your kids are like, your oldest daughter's like 11.
9 and
She's,
10. Yeah,
yeah,
she's
9 and
10.
10.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, the ability, so many couples get to that 15 years and still can't look back because, especially, I think there's a lot of lack of introspection often coming from the male side, not to
Yeah.
generalize, but
No.
so to be able to be introspective in that way and be like, admit like, that wasn't the argument that I was having. That's a really beautiful thing to be able to bring to a relationship. Where did that come from? Is that just you guys having conversations over the years and you growing up together?
No, it's only happened the last few months, really.
Mm.
I realized that I suffer tremendously from panic attacks
Mm.
and have never been able to figure out what it was. I would just get angry, right, and lash out and do random things, and it's only been recently that I discovered it. And then I did do a few bouts of therapy and
Mhm.
had to drill down to that it's me, it's not actually everyone else as much as I want it to be everyone else. Um, but it allows me to have honest conversations with her now because I can actually have the honest conversation with myself.
Yeah.
Never could do that. I had an excuse for it, and that's like part of the charisma and the and quote unquote manipulation is I have an ability to reason anything to mean what I want it to mean.
Yeah.
Now that's great in business, it's great in making deals. In personal life, it is really shitty, right? And you make
Yeah.
other people feel shitty. And at 35, I'm finally realizing that and trying to fix it. And I admit it's a long it's a walk, not a run.
Mhm.
But we've been able to have more honest conversations
Amazing.
where we're realizing, or I'm able to say, instead of us fighting for 3 days and then just kind of making up, I'm able to say this one thing you said, I fixated on it and it triggered me, and she's able to say, well, I didn't even mean that. Like,
Right.
that's not how I said it. I meant a different word, right? And we're realizing that a lot of our things and even my issues come from me just hearing what I wanted to hear as opposed to what
Mhm.
was actually said, and fixating on it. And even after the apology comes and all those and the work's being done to make it right, I'm still like, but you said that thing. And it hurt me to my core. And
Mhm.
as opposed to before where I would just fight and go and not let
Yeah.
go and push and throw knives and daggers until I made her feel how she made me feel when again she wasn't even trying to do that in the first place. So it's definitely a learning experience. I
Yeah.
again, I've been like my mom worked all day every day, right? So and my sister's all older than me by like a decade. So I was always by myself. I did whatever I wanted. I was the afterthought. No, as long as I didn't die, no one cared, right? And so I'm used to that, doing what I want to do when I want to do it, how I want to do it, and then to live with someone else, and then to have kids and build a life. It's a learning curve on how to interact with someone else and how to do things together, as opposed to doing the way I want to and then fitting into that.
Well, I would imagine too, Rob, like when you grow up, like you said, your father left, you were kind of living between two worlds, right? It would probably be really hard to figure out who you are until you're 35, right? Like, because how could you be honest with yourself if you're not really sure who yourself is? Like you said, I love that you said this, like your vernacular changed, like everything changed, and you almost couldn't go back home again, metaphorically speaking, at a very young age, right? So I would imagine, like, of course, you're like on this journey and you're like, I'm not really sure who the core of myself is. What do I believe? What are my values? And I found that having children really changes that, right? So I would love your perspective, and I have boys and you have girls. So I would love your perspective on like, how did having children really help you figure out kind of who Rob was?
That's a great question that I don't know. We're going to discover this together right now, because the for me, like I still don't know how to interact with them. And so I have like my oldest daughter is extremely creative, extremely sensitive, as creatives typically are. Um uh Kind of a spitting, well, looks like me, but spitting image of my wife. And imagine me and my wife having our tumultuous years, and then there being a little mini her that I don't even understand in the first place, right? And so couldn't in my mind couldn't really connect with her. And then I have my other, who I think looks like my wife, is dark like me, but just like once should have been a boy, right? Is just extremely girly in that likes dolls and does like traditional women stuff, right? Wants to cook and color and do things like that, but then just rough, like has an attitude, like is knows what she wants, isn't afraid of anything, is okay being by herself, and that's just me, right? And so I connect with them differently. And I've been trying to be more aware of that. And not necessarily saying one's a favorite and one's not. It's just more of I'm able to sit with one for much longer than I can sit with the other. Because I don't fully know how to. And what I realized is that, or not even realized, my wife told me, and then I realized, is that my oldest was picking up on that. And she realized that there was just something different, and they had a conversation, and she said, daddy's different with me. And so she started to take on things that I like to try and connect. And in my oblivion, was just like, oh no, I don't want to do that right now. Right. And so it's been hard, and ironically, as someone who's been surrounded by women his entire life. Right. Like everywhere I've worked, either I've reported to or women have reported to me. I have sisters, like all my friends, I'm more friendly with women than guys.
You're raised by a single mom,
right?
Yeah.
And then for some reason, like when it comes to my own children, it's very difficult for me to connect with a woman. But it's been therapeutic to figure out who I am, and then be able to actually identify things with her that I can actually talk to her about. And even with the other one, who is literally me, like just extremely self-absorbed sometimes, can't understand why everyone else is upset, right? It's my world and everyone else is living in it, and so I totally get it, and I'm able to coach her on how. Now granted, it fails horribly because she's 9 and she can't reason logically, right? But it's been interesting as the guy with 3 women in the house, and how I'm starting to, I think I'm patting myself on the back, but I'm starting to actually get it and click and be able to have real and honest conversations with them. Like we were talking the other day about that protecting each other, and they have to depend on each other, and it's them first and then everyone else. And I never got that conversation, right? No one ever said, hey, as your mom and dad, we are here for you. We will help hide the body, and then you'll get in trouble. But
talk about why you did that.
Exactly, right? And we had that conversation the other day, and I think it clicked. Now granted, we're gonna have to have it a few more times. but like being a dad is scary. Like being a parent is scary.
Being a parent is horrifying. And I think it's something that we don't talk about. And you said something that I wanted you said a lot of things that I wanted to talk about, but when our children look and remind us, like our spouse, sometimes it's really triggering. I think I would love to know, like, how bringing daughters into this world, right? Like, and Jenny and I talk a lot about this of like our generation is parenting much differently
Yeah.
than we were parented, right?
Oh, for
And
sure.
so what's it like for you to like bring daughters into this 2023 world, right? And um as a 6'4", Black father looking at this landscape ahead of us, how, like, what are your thoughts on that and like raising these girls in this environment?
So it's interesting. So a couple of years ago, I wrote this thing. I read a lot, and so I wrote this thing about the different experiences my two daughters will have.
Mm.
1 year apart. People, when they were younger, people would say, "Oh, they're twins," because they're only 14 months apart. But Lou is light, like, and my
Yeah.
wife is light skinned, so Lou is light and Leia is dark. I would always say to people, you don't realize that when they walk into a store together, if they walk in 1 minute apart, they will get two different experiences.
Yeah.
Oof.
And it's something that ironically Lou has figured out. And so Lou is very much, and she's the older one, but she's very much into Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And she had a conversation with my wife, and she said, "I don't look like Daddy. I don't look like Leia,"
Yeah.
which is an interesting thing because she's Black, like she's Portuguese and Black, but she's Black, and so I wouldn't call it overcompensating, but she is highly aware of the fact that she isn't the same, and so she wants to embrace that side of her
Yeah.
life. And so, like, she draws a lot. She's a really good artist, and she drew like a fist going like this, and she was so excited to show me. And then she went to school, and they were doing something, I can't remember what, and she goes, "Daddy, can I ask the principal if they're going to do something on Black Lives Matter?" And I was like, "Well, sure, like, let me know how it goes."
Mhm.
But she's more into that side of it.
Mhm.
Right.
Whereas Leia just could care less, right? She's not old enough. I forget because I'm tall, my wife's tall, so they're tall.
Mhm.
I forget all the time if they're 9 and 10, and
Yeah.
that they're still
I was going to
figuring
ask
it
you
out.
about that. I was going to ask you about that, about being, you've always been tall and then marrying a woman who's older than you. Did that kind of like make you feel like you were older than you were at certain times in your life to be like taller physically and then marrying somebody older than you?
Oh, everyone always thinks I'm older than I am.
Yeah.
People think I'm older than her because she doesn't age. But
No,
the
I might
but
have a
the
crush on your wife. I don't know. We probably have to
I
figure this
mean,
out.
many people do. People become friends with me so they can get closer to her. It's very,
She
her
can
name's
come on the
Jennifer
podcast
Lopez, right?
too.
And so it's really interesting um having to worry about them
Yeah.
for that because they're bigger and they're taller and they're
Mhm.
developing more. And um I worry, granted we live in the middle of nowhere, so we have to drive them where they want to go. They can't just walk anywhere. We don't have
Right.
sidewalks, right? And so I have that little thing that I get to hold on to.
Yeah.
Mm.
So they don't need a phone yet because they're not going anywhere, right? But
Mhm.
when they are out there, it's going to be scary, right?
Mhm.
Especially my youngest, she's built like a sport, like she's got a
Mm.
butt and she's got muscles, and
Mhm.
like, and so when she gets out there, I'm gonna be up all night thinking
Yeah.
about who's looking at her because I'm a guy
Yeah.
and I know what I was doing when I
Mhm.
was that
Yeah.
age, right? And so those those things weigh on you, and we have to have those conversations
Yeah.
that I don't know that I'm prepared to have, right?
Yeah.
Especially as a father and a guy, like Lou got sick, and we thought that she may be getting her period. I was like, and my wife goes, "Well, I'm gonna get Leia. You have this conversation." I was like, I am not prepared. I don't even know what to say, how to say it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it
Yeah.
wrong. Those things come up, and
Yeah.
we're not taught to talk about that,
No.
right? No matter the culture, no matter the decade, we're taught to deal with it behind closed doors,
Mhm.
and so it's a scary thing to try and figure it out when I didn't, like, no one told me the birds and the bees. No one had, like, the other day we saw a commercial and it was about suicide, it was about gun safety, but it was also about suicide. And Lou looks at me and she goes, "What's suicide?" And I was like, "I am not ready to have," and I'm trying to like find a kid-friendly way
Yeah.
of answering an extremely
Nuanced.
important right?
Eh,
And I think I did it correctly, and she kind of just shrugged it off. And the funniest thing happened. She correlated it to a joke in a show that and the joke clicked for her
right.
because she didn't know what was happening when it was a Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It was a joke about suicide in jail. And she laughed at the joke 3 days ago, but she didn't actually know what she was laughing at, I realized.
Right.
Because then she went, "Oh, that's what that meant."
Right.
And then I was like, "Well, do we have to dive deeper into this?" But she kind of moved on from it. I was like, "Oh, thank God." But really, like, it's something that we have to dive into,
Yeah.
and that's not the only subject. When you talk about like drug use and drinking and all those things
Yeah.
that no one talked to me about, and then I got immersed into that world as a 15, 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And so like it's not one in which I'm prepared to
Yeah.
have or even know how to have those conversations in a way where I'm not overly exposing them, but then also I don't want to shy away from it. So like being a parent again, it's extremely hard.
It's hard.
And we don't trade notes enough. I don't think enough of us.
I was just
Maybe
gonna
that's-
ask. I was gonna ask that, Rob. Do you have other? We talk to a lot of fathers here on the podcast. Do you have other men in your life that you can talk to about parenting?
Not really. Like I talk to my dad now, but my dad was a drug addict, right? And clean for 40 years or maybe 30 years, but was like heavy into it. And that
Yeah.
when you talk about leaving, in my mind, because again, me and my mom never talked about it. I was like, "Oh, he's a drug addict. He left." But
Right.
he left to go and get help and realize that he couldn't live where we lived and stay clean. Right. And that's not
Yeah.
something we talked about until I was like 23, 24. So I went through life with this entire resentment and
Yeah, that's
now
a
to
really
try
different
and
narrative.
right and it's hard to just switch automatically and go, "Oh, you know what,
Right.
that makes sense, now I'm going to be in a great relationship." It's
Right.
like, yeah, but I'm a kid, so and I'm very self-absorbed because that's what life is, right? We think about how things affect us first, and so it's a hard thing to reconcile his reasons with abandonment, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's a weird space to be in. And then for me to not want to, well, to not be around it, but still quote unquote inherit that gene
Mm-hmm.
and dive heavily into it. And then to look at my kid and say, well, I'm around them 24/7. What are they inheriting from me versus what are they learning from other people? And then you add COVID into that, and they were around
Yeah.
us for 2 years straight,
Yeah.
24/7. Like it's everything is complicated. I say all the time, the details change, but the themes are the same, right?
Yeah.
There's only but so many themes that
Yeah.
in life that we can go to. Now, how we get to those end results, what the plot and the climax look like may change.
Right.
But realistically, there's only but so many problems.
Yeah.
Now, and we tend to assume, and social media has only made it worse. And I don't know that social media made it worse. I think the fact that we didn't have social media meant that we all got to keep our shit to ourselves.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
and not have to share even a bright spot of it. We just got to live in our own little world. But I think we keep things to ourselves that if we were to share, we'd realize that someone goes, "Oh, me too." Right. And again, like when I look at me and my wife, are like all families have issues, right? And just because it was just me and my mom versus her and her two parents, again, the things that we may have been fighting over were different between our parents.
Yeah.
But the fights, we all have fights with our parents,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You think about a relationship between a mother and a son and a mother and a daughter, very different, but the same for every pair of mother and sons and mother and daughter. And we don't, that's generational, right? Because you don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. That's what our parents said because their parents said because their parents said. And I'm always curious if there was a time in the last 1,000 years where there were parents and children who shared things with each other and how that changed over 2,000 or 3,000 years.
Yeah.
Because these are the random thoughts I have in my mind, but the idea of even this, like this podcast and people sharing things, I think it's really important and being vulnerable and people realizing it's okay to feel like a failure, because we all do at some point.
Yeah.
What we do
Yeah.
with that is different, but everyone has their rough patches, whether it be a day or 7 years. We all go through some type of self-doubt, especially when you're dealing with separations and divorces and raising kids. And like, if we shared the books with each other in our cliff notes, we'd realize that we can solve these problems so much quicker. But we're from various generations of keep it to yourself. No one wants to know your struggles.
Yeah, and that's why we do the podcast, literally.
It also gets back to like what you were saying about your experience of being at Friends, which was, I think it's so different now because there's this social media. We were kind of at Friends right when social media was starting a little bit.
Yeah.
There was like, blogs and stuff like that. But I'm sure it would have felt these things were happening, like you said, that went right over your head because there was like no central place to read about it when we left school that night, that day. It was kind of these things happened in school and then we went home and maybe we texted
It was
a little
instant
bit.
messenger.
Yeah, instant messenger and texting. But
yeah,
now it's like there's a receptacle. You can post it on Instagram. You can post it on your stories. And
it's funny because I was talking to my mom. I posted something on my Instagram about like the anxiety that I get, and my mom called me like 2 days later, randomly in like the morning, and I don't always answer when my mom calls. I don't always call her, but she called me and she said, "I read what you wrote," and I was expecting her to go, "Oh, I understand," but she wrote, "I get a lot of anxiety."
no.
And I never, my mom ran a jail. Like I didn't, and you would
Wow.
now looking back on it, it makes sense. Like a woman running a juvenile detention. But it was powerful for me to have that conversation with my mom, who we didn't necessarily share those kinds of things growing up. We weren't like lovey-dovey, even to this point. Like she's more lovey-dovey with my kids than she is with me. And even my wife, like they connect further than I am. And it's probably more me than her. But the idea of especially in the Black community, we don't share that stuff. Right? You be strong and you carry on. And so to have that combo with her now, and we've been having a lot more combos like that. Like I took her record collection, which is just massive, and her opening up about certain records and her boyfriends and how she would trade. These are things I never knew, right? And so to learn them from my 72-year-old mom when I'm 35, and to be listening to music she listened to when she was 35, it's like a mind trip, because we're getting closer as we get older, but we're sharing more. And I realize the more I write on LinkedIn about my personal life, because I don't really write about marketing and all that stuff. I write about life and having kids and things like that, and talking to people, or people DMing me and going, "Thank you for writing that," and realizing that we all have these random struggles that aren't so random, because they're pretty
right.
There's a pattern. We all run through those things through different years of our lives, and if we share it more, we'd be able to solve them much quicker than if we try and do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So how did your experience kind of like going, through all these different journeys in your life affect your decision to go into marketing? And I ask this because we talk, we're in marketing too. And we talk a lot about when you're in marketing, you have to be able to take on the personality and the characteristics and the codes and the tone of so many different people and companies. And that's what makes a really good marketer, right? So how did all of that come together? And tell us a little bit about your background in marketing and the journey there.
Yeah, again, that's the best thing to come out of Friends Academy, right? The idea of going, and I mean this in the literal sense, talking to someone who worked at a company, or who was the janitor at a company, and then going on the bus, going to school, and talking to the student and the parent of the person who owned the company. And it's like, right? You learn how to be you learn how to absorb people and meet them where they are.
Yes.
Which is what marketing is in a nutshell: meeting someone where they are, whether it's on their medium that they're using, or in the point of their lives where they are. It's really psychology, right? I wish I had known that before I graduated and I went into psychology. I kind of learned it on the fly, like every other marketer, right? I went to school for marketing and learned about campaigns as opposed to how to understand people. But I think and that's the book smart side of it. The personal side of it is just learning how to understand and talk to people and listen. And I've always been that that's always fascinated me, understanding where people are coming from, how they got to where they are, what they're doing with their days, and then as a kid, how can I use that to my advantage, right? And
Right.
then as an older person, how can I help them? And that's what I do now, and where I live is, how can I help someone? And yeah, it'll come back to me eventually, hopefully, but realistically, I get to help this person and use what I've learned to help
Yeah.
them learn something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And so when I think about marketing, I'm taken to brand marketing just because you're building something from scratch and you're
Yeah.
solving a puzzle, right? How do I become how do I make people become aware of me? How do I create exposure? How do I create engagement? I love those puzzles. And as I get older, I'm more uh involved and more enamored with the business side of it. How do I turn all of that into a
Right.
profit of some sort or a revenue driver? And so I'm always looking to reverse engineer the puzzle and I see what it's supposed to look like. How can I make it look like that? And likewise, I just like learning random things, like
Yeah.
the idea of using, like, going into banking after what, 10 years between agency and publisher side, and then moving to Canada and not being able to do that. I was like, all right, I'll go into banking, I'll try it. And becoming a branch manager and having no idea how banking actually works, right? Like, aside from having a credit card, like, I didn't know how the actual intricacies of it work. But the idea of coaching a team, the idea of marketing and how to use marketing to drive sales, because that's what banking actually is. It's a sales
Yeah.
job. I understood that part. And so managing a team of like 13 people, some of which were like 30-year veterans, there was nothing I was going to teach them about banking, right? But what I realized is that they don't fully know how to have a conversation. They understand how to get someone to sign a mortgage.
Mhm.
They don't understand how that is actually affecting that person's life, right? And that's where I come from, of people who never owned anything, and
Right.
now they can. Now I get to, like, let me show you how to tell that story so that they understand how it actually affects them. Yes, they get the mortgage, that's one effect, but that's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about what that means for the family, what that means for their family's family, right? This is a much bigger deal than you getting a sale. And so that's where I try and teach people about the feeling around it, not just the end result, because that is something that we can all identify with, whether it's our first time buying a car or our first time being able to afford to rent a home. Like,
Mhm.
those are major milestones for some people that some of us have the privilege of not even having to think about. It's just a thing that we're doing. And for others, it completely changes the trajectory of their lives.
Yeah.
And I get that's the one altruistic part of me. I get to experience that with them.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, I'm just as ambitious as everyone else, right? So what's in it for me? It definitely comes to mind from time to time. But marketing is one of those things that I actually fell into. I got an internship for it.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, this is really cool. Now, granted, the internship was at MTV, so anything is cool there. And I don't necessarily, and I was having this conversation with my wife, I don't know that if I hadn't gotten that internship, if I would have ended up in marketing. I would have maybe done something else, because I
Yeah.
got the internship before I chose my major. And so I chose my major based on that.
Right.
And so it's a weird thing to think about where life could have gone, considering what interests me now versus what interests me then.
Right.
But marketing is what I know, and I love talking about it. So
Well, it seems to fulfill a certain like you I told you this when we talked the other day, but like you remind me a lot of Olivia in a lot of ways, the way your minds work. And I think that you're saying that the one altruistic part of you is, helping people sort of identify that narrative and be able to follow it, but you love helping people. Like
yeah,
you and I talked about this when we talked, just when we caught up. You like are a natural coach and you naturally want to help people along their way. And Olivia is very much the same way, where like you want to connect people. When we were on the phone, you're like, what can I do? How can I help you? Like I mean, again, like somebody I met, we've known each other for 21 years, but that was the first conversation we'd ever had.
oh yeah, for like
and so like immediately I was like a little nervous going into it. I was like, I've never had a conversation with this guy, but immediately I was like, oh my gosh, like you're such an adorable person. Like you are worthy of adoration. And so and in that you connect with people and you like
Right.
to connect people. Like, I think marketing at its essence, at its truest, most beautiful place, is about connecting people to what they need and
Yeah.
connecting people to what they don't know that they need, and bringing them on that path. And I think that if you hadn't found marketing, like Olivia didn't go to school for marketing, she found her way there. You know, she found her way there through teaching. You would have found your way to, maybe you wouldn't have called it marketing, but maybe you would have called it business coaching at first, or networking, or community management. You would have found your way. You were like, you were going to this place because it scratches the itch, and it seems to like also satisfy the things that you learned and the way that you learned to be along the way.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. I think like one of the things I get a kick out of, and you kind of said it, connect people what they didn't know they needed, is when someone comes to me with a problem, and when after you root cause it, you realize it's not, or they realize it's not what they actually thought.
Yeah.
Those moments of when things click is so satisfying, especially because for all I like to help people, I don't like to do people's work.
Right.
And so like I ask a lot of questions and watch people hit the realization on their own. But when you watch someone come in about problem A and then realize that really it's problem Z, and A is just a piece of it,
Right.
and you see the aha moment happen in real time, is the most satisfying thing, right? And now, granted, I may not profit off of it, I may not get anything out of it, but I feel completely accomplished once that happens.
Yeah.
And then connecting people, I think that the world is, I have benefited so much from people connecting me to other people. And I realize that I can't always get something out of it. So like we may have a conversation and someone might say, you need to meet Jenny, you're gonna love her, you two can help each other. And we may not actually be able to help each other. But 5 years down the line, someone's gonna come to me and say, hey, I need this thing. I go, you know what? 5 years ago, I had a conversation with someone, and I love, and my wife is much better at it than me because her mind is a steel trap, and she remembers everyone's name. She remembers their backstory, their character development. Like she remembers all of that. And so to watch her like think back into her mind of someone she met in high school who she's still connected to, and they do this thing that could help. It's the craziest thing to watch. And I don't think I give myself enough credit for the fact that maybe not at the level that she can do it, but I can still do that. And luckily going to Friends Academy, the world becomes so much smaller. Because someone knows someone who knows someone.
Always.
And they are actually, everyone's willing to help to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
A certain extent. Yes.
Yeah, it's a fun little experiment of this thing called life, and I enjoy puzzles and trying to solve them.
So what are you gonna do with your writing, Rob?
I don't know. I don't know right now. And I was thinking about this, and my wife always said that you need to write a book. I don't know what to write a book about, but because I only know what I know, and so I don't try and dress something up. When you go on my LinkedIn, there's no correlation back to marketing where like I tripped and stubbed my toe, and there's 9 reasons why you should do brand marketing.
Yeah, the thought bros.
It's more of like I have one I'm thinking about now around my child asking me about suicide. And just the difficulty in answering that. Whatever comes to mind is what I write about, and it all comes from a place of just pure honesty. And there's some fear around that, right? Because some of the things I write about, I'm like, oh, should I post this? But I do, and either it gets no traction whatsoever, and that's fine, or people who I don't even know write me and say, I really appreciated that, and then we start a dialogue. And I think for me, I will probably have to back into what writing actually does. But for me right now, it's just therapeutic. It's I have to get things out of my mind. Because I will fixate and stare at them and stare off. Like I live on the water, and so I'd be staring at a lake just thinking about a thought. And if I don't get it out, it'll consume me. And it's the same with like my relationships. I absorb people's emotions. And I didn't realize it until like a couple of years ago, and it's exhausting.
Yes,
right?
it is.
Because when someone's sad, I get sad to help them get happy. If someone's happy, I'm happy. If they're excited, I'm excited. And it's not even code switching. It is literally absorption of their emotion. And then I have to, when they leave, they may be better, but I'm still in there like their web of entanglement, right? And so the writing helps me to be able to get it out and not
Yeah.
have to focus on it.
Yeah.
So right now, that's still where it's going to be. I don't know. I think it will help my business if I write about marketing more, but I
No,
like
I
to
will
talk about
say,
marketing.
um, my one piece of advice is copy and paste those LinkedIn posts to a Word document, because I wrote a lot on Instagram about my divorce and captions, and I ended up saving all the captions and it became like a 20-page Word document. And then
Yeah.
I archived all the posts when I
Yeah,
went public and stuff. So save everything you write somewhere else, because that could turn into something else for
Yeah,
sure.
you can back into it that way. That's what I was
Yeah.
going to say too, because then you can
Yeah.
start seeing themes come through, and also
yeah,
start seeing like how much you've written. Because you write like write long LinkedIn posts. Like
I
they're
have to
nice.
oh
follow
yeah,
him. I
great,
gotta
great.
go
They're
follow you.
juicy. Yeah, they're
Um,
nice. And like there's a lot
Please.
there. So I feel like if you just copied and pasted those, and you could hire one of the girls to do it, just copy and paste it into a Word document, I
Yeah.
bet you'd have the foundations of something that would tell you what it is if you
Yeah,
looked at it.
yeah. I think like the the idea of the life that I have lived, not that it's like this grandiose thing, but when you talk about us all going through the same problems, again, the details change, but someone else could read what I'm going through as a 6 foot black man with 2 children, mixed with a wife, and going through all kinds of stuff. There's something that someone can pull from that. And so there's an opportunity to write my story just so that someone else can feel like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not just me. Because I feel like we all have those it's just me kind of things, and we just deal with them
Yeah.
and move on with our life.
I think the benefit too of your story is that there are a lot of fundamental truths, and there are a lot of people that can relate. Like I think there's a lot of kids that go on scholarship to high
Yeah.
class, private schools with only white people, and they're the fish out of water kind of situation. So you have all of that. At the same time, you do have these sort of distinctive details, like interning at MTV, like meeting your wife young, getting married like young. Like you were
Yeah.
definitely on the younger end of our class to get
Oh, for
married
sure.
and have kids. And I was going to say too, you must have not meet a lot of other 35-year-old dads with 10-year-olds, especially in your social strata, right? Because when I taught nursery school for 2 years. All of the dads were like well into their late 40s,
Yeah.
right? So it's when you're at that level where you guys are now, your social group, they're probably a lot of the dads are older than you. So there are
Yeah.
these distinctive details that where people will be like, I relate to this story. And also it's interesting because he did this and his wife is fascinating and the kids are, like all of this stuff. So there's a lot there.
Oh, for sure. No, you're not wrong, and I appreciate the feedback, right? And I think being able to, like, the wheels are turning now, but
And then we just want to read. We just want to read
being
your writing, Rob. That's all we want to do.
oh, you know what? It's all out there, and and it's not. Again, there are times when I move away from writing because I just don't have anything on my mind. And I can't just force things. It just doesn't
No.
come out because I
Yeah.
have a particular way. Like, it's funny, and I try and make myself the butt of the joke, and
Yeah.
but still have some kind of lesson in there, like very Bill Cosby stuff. But the idea of sharing that, like, I do appreciate that feedback because I can run with that.
So, we ask all of our guests this: for anybody that's going through a fresh start or a pivot in life, what would be some wise words that you could offer them?
Oh, tell someone. I
Ooh.
and tell them quickly. I think so. A friend of mine got laid off, and she called me to kind of help her figure out how to build out her consulting business.
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh, did you tell your parents yet?" She went, "No, I'm finding the right time." I go, "You got to tell them now. Like, get it out of the way so that they can get all of the bad help out of the way, right? Because as soon as you do, like, you get fired or you lose your job, whatever, however you want to categorize it, you tell people and they're like, "Oh, I know someone you need to talk to," and it's like, but that's not even what I do, right? So you gotta get that stuff out of the way so that you can create a clear path. So I tell people, tell them as soon as possible. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, again, you're not the first person ever to be laid off. You're not the first person ever to break a leg. Like, just get it out of the way, move on, rip the
Love
band-aid off.
that.
Now, again, we are by nature self-absorbed because our brains are wired to think about how it's going to keep you alive, right?
Mhm.
And so fear is crippling. But once it's done, then it's done and you can move on. And so I say, like, if you not just fail quick, but if something happens, say it as quickly as possible to someone out loud so that you can start planning on how to fix it.
Yeah, I love that.
Love that.
Jenny, you want to do the last question here?
Okay. And I was like, we have to remember to ask this question because we don't always ask it. What was the last best thing that you ate?
The last best thing that I ate? Jesus. I make all my own stuff, so like
Yeah,
Yeah,
tell
Rob
us.
makes really beautiful barbecue and smoked meats and
that's the last best. That's such a difficult question.
I feel like
he made some really good looking pancakes that I was like, that was
Oh,
the
I
one
owe
thing
you
missed.
pancakes for
You owe me
sure.
pancakes.
You know what? I made oh no, my wife made macadamia nut cookies.
Ooh.
And like it was like it was a mix,
Underrated.
right? She just mixed it, right? But she
Yeah.
added things too, and it was freaking delicious.
Oh, so
Um,
good.
But like I don't know, I make so much stuff.
He does. We'll have to post maybe in the blog post. Like he
For
really,
sure.
it's like gorgeous. The Instagram for the food is my favorite.
We'll link it.
I don't know, like this hard. Like I like food, so it's really hard to like choose something. But
What
because
are you
I
gonna
like,
have for lunch today? Let's ask that question.
I made a tomato soup. It wasn't actually my best showing. The grilled cheese was much better. But
Classic.
Yeah,
the tomato
grilled cheese
soup
sounds
is
good.
where it's at.
Yeah.
Actually, my wife makes this thing called moqueca, which is like a Portuguese seafood stew, which is my
Yeah.
favorite thing that she doesn't make anymore. But it's got everything you could possibly want in it, and that's a bigger story, right? It's peasant food that is now extremely
Elevated.
popular.
Yeah.
But that I like peasant food, like curry chicken and
Me
like
too.
all the scraps that
Mhm.
20 years or even 100 years ago the rich people didn't want to touch, and now it's a $55
I
plate.
feel like this is like a book happening, Rob. There's
Yeah.
like a
All about
thing
it.
about the food and the being on scholarship and the
You know?
writing, and it's all coming together. There's a lot here.
Mhm.
It's a nice little woven
Mhm.
tapestry of
You
stories
guys,
here.
you guys are my muses. I
Well, Rob, we really, really appreciate your time, and we know you're busy, and sharing your vulnerabilities and your story. And we could not agree with you more. When people share their stories, it really, really helps other people to like find themselves and share their stories. So we are so grateful for this conversation today and for you being here.
oh, likewise, I enjoyed it. You guys are awesome. We got to
Thank
do a
you.
part 2. I'm all for
Oh,
it.
Well, we're
100%.
anytime, Rob.
You're welcome to drop in.
Thank you for listening to today's story. We're always here, and we're proud of you. Until next time, brave one.
A Fresh Story is brought to you by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to start again. You can read the show notes and learn more about today's episode at freshstartsregistry.com/podcast.